If you're watching this presentation, I'm sure that you are aware of all the activities that are happening with regards to Russia. I'm recording this during the period of time in March of 2022 when Russia has decided to take a defensive or offensive activity inside the Ukraine. This three-part review is really going to be taking a look at the emergence of the new Russia. This is material that has been gathered over quite a number of years. It's not just recent material, but material that goes back some years, maybe more than a decade. Because this has been a progress of the current state of Russia in its movement towards more of a new Russia, maybe even back to the Tsars in some way. We've broken this down into approximately 20-minute discussions. The first part, we'll talk about Russia in prophecy, scriptural prophecy, and give a brief introduction to that. The purpose of this presentation isn't to go into details around prophecy. Those are left to other videos. This one will talk about just the connection of Russia in prophecy. And then we'll talk about the return of the Tsars and to Mother Russia and the resetting up of Russia into a state that was once very powerful and certainly looks to continue to be moving forward. The second 20-minute presentation will look at the awakening of the Eastern Orthodox or the Russian Orthodox Church, and we'll look at that church and its return to the Middle East, and also look at Putin and his relationship with Israel. And the third and final installment, we'll look at the various aspects of Russia as it's been getting involved with Iran, Syria, also Putin and his relationship with the Pope. And finally, we'll kind of close off on Putin, Russia, and Israel, and that complicated relationship that currently exists. I'll jump into Russia in biblical prophecy. If we take a look at Ezekiel 38, we certainly find a remarkable prophecy of the latter days. That's down in verse 8. And this term speaks of the closing days of man's rule over the earth, and they're just before the return of God's Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. The leader of a confederacy, it talks about of Gog in verse 2. This title, a Hebrew word meaning roof, or hence at the top. And if you think about where Israel is and you look to the top of the world at that point, you would see that's modern-day Russia. Politically, the word indicates a powerful leader, a man in immense political and military stature. And geographically, it means top or uttermost part of the north, and that's in verse 6. According to Josephus, these people were ancient Scythians, and Doricilius, who wrote about 100 years before Josephus, traced Scythians much further in Europe and to the shore of the Baltic, on the land of Magog, incorporates a nation of Central Europe and incorporates other nations as far as the Baltic is concerned. And the opening verse of Ezekiel 38 should be noted, carefully noted that Gog is not the prince of Magog, but of Rush. So there is an impressive array of evidence that certainly identify the name of Rush as modern-day Russia. You can see certain, like Bokracht, the historian said Rush is the most ancient form under which the history makes mention of Russia. Stanley in the book The Jewish Church stated that the name Rush, Hebrew Rushas, unfortunately translated in the English version, the chief, first appeared in Ezekiel 38 verse 2 and Ezekiel 39 verse 1. It is the only name of a modern nation which appears in the Old Testament. And then Gibeon noted, Edward Gibeon, in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, wrote, among the Greeks, the national appellation was a singular form, Rush. And then a highly respected Jewish scholar wrote, proper name of a northern nation with Tubal and Meshech, undoubtedly the Russians, who were mentioned in the Byzantine writers of the 10th century under the name of Oil Rush, the Russian dwelling in the north of Tarshish. So there's, again, quite a bit of connections to the words in the scripture by other historians over the years of making mention of this land to the north being this Hebrew word that I mentioned before about that was translated as prince signifies an exalted one or someone who's strong and lifted up. Ezekiel describes it as a powerful or authoritative leader who would become the leader of Russia and other nations in the latter days. Perhaps this is the new Tsar of Russia. The names Meshech and Tubal Further establish the verses describing a confederacy of European nations under the leadership of the most powerful autocratic man in Russia at the time of divine intervention in human affairs. Now, we can certainly see some of this movement, certainly not all of the movement of this, but certainly elements of kind of regathering, perhaps you could even say, of the old Soviet republics together into, or connecting them either directly or indirectly to the Russian Federation. Places like Georgia, for example, and also Belarus as another example. And maybe we could see Ukraine as well, perhaps. And you can see that Tochart had written that it's incredible that the Rush and Meshech, of whom Ezekiel speaks, descended the Russians and the Muscovites, nations of the great celebrity in European Scythia. And then Junius wrote of them, a barbarous people inhabiting the Muscan mountains between Iberia, now Georgia, Armenia, and the Koleks. Tubal is not difficult to identify, of course, as modern day Tobolsky. And then finally, we see in Ezekiel 38 a picture of the latter days, and that's in verse 16, where an all-powerful Russia would dominate Europe, and confederate with many other nations, gathering together its military power. Some of the things you could see in Europe today is the dependency, for example, on Russia oil and Russia natural gas. This is a problem area for most of Europe that they depend on Russia to provide goods, and could certainly bring them closer to Russia if needed. At that time, when Russia makes its grand move to building up its image empire, this is in the preface to Help Us Israel, which was published in 1848, the great creator of heaven and earth will intervene, and he shall send Jesus Christ, whom the heavens must receive until the times of the restitution of all things, which God hath spoken by the mouth of his holy prophets, because he hath appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained. You can read of those words in Acts, both in chapter 3 and chapter 17. We know from Scripture that Russian aims for world domination will come in the bitter end of the land of Israel when Jesus Christ and his resurrected break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces. And you can read of that in both Psalm 2 and also compare that with Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, just some initial insight into the Scriptures and as it relates to Russia in the latter days. Again, there's a lot more that could be said there. But let's talk about the topic here around the rise of the new Tsar. And in many ways, Putin seems to be taking this on. He's been a prime minister or the president since the founding of the Russian Federation, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And despite the protests we witnessed against him throughout Russia before the last few elections, he continues to win easily. Under Putin, the mother Russia has reemerged in many ways. Under him, the government has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on rebuilding the tattered military. Certainly this current conflict in Ukraine may question some of that, but it's significantly stronger than it had been at the collapse of the Soviet Union. Billionaires have been thrown into jail unless they're friends with Putin. There's many things talked about that in the press as well. He has said that Americans are living like parasites off the global economy and their monopoly of the dollar. And all signs point to Putin being a fierce Russian nationalist and imperialist in many ways. And he's reported to own close to $1 million worth of watches, but he's only paid $150,000 per year. There are some estimates that he might be worth somewhere around $200 billion. So he's certainly would appear that he's gathered a lot of wealth to himself. So a little bit more about Putin, this strongman. He was born in October of 1952. He's a graduate from international law branch of the law department of the Leningrad State University in 1975. Leningrad, nowadays St. Petersburg. He wrote in his final thesis on international law. His PhD thesis was entitled The Strategic Planning of Regional Resources under the Formation of a Market Relationships. And it argued that Russian economic success would depend on creating national energy champions. A lot of that has come true over the years. While at university, he became a member of the Soviet Communist Party, and he remained in the party until the party was dissolved in December of 1991. Now, we're told in history that he became part of the KGB upon graduation in 1975. And in March of 1997, when President Boris Yeltsin appointed Putin as chief of presidential staff, he remained there until May of 1998, and the chief of the main control directorate of the Presidential Property Management Department. And when Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned in December, the end of December 1999, according to the Constitution, Putin, in his current role, would become the acting president of the Russian Federation. And as I said before, some people say he's worth $70 billion. In recent weeks, it's been reported that that could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 billion. There's a lot of things press, and not all of this might be true, but if you look online, there are supposedly pictures of his many palaces. Again, some of these may be very much validated, and others maybe not as much validated. But there's certainly quite a bit of evidence of his wealth and how he's made himself into the supreme leader of the Russian Federation, and certainly has taken on a lot of the trappings of what we would think of in history as being the czars. Another picture of a palace here, and also quite a bit written about it, that he built his own secret New Versailles, and that this Versailles had sofas that themselves were worth $28,000. So it seems to be pretty lavish in his spending on himself, certainly, as running this Soviet, or what maybe he still considers the Soviet state, but today is the Russian Federation. Now, Putin is quite connected, actually, religiously. He is known to regularly attend the Russian Orthodox Church, especially on main Orthodox Christian holidays. He's established a relationship with the monarchs of the Russian Church, the late Alexander II of Moscow, and now the current Krull of Moscow. These are the head, basically consider this as the Pope or the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, and has a close connection to the church and to the leader of the church. As president, he has taken an active personal part in promoting the active canonic communion with the Moscow Patriarch, and signed in May of 2007 something that restored the relationship with the Moscow-based Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia after a split about 80 years ago. Now, if we look at the Putin and the church itself, creating an understanding with the general populace, you do that through interactions with churches that control let's say, the hearts of the people, and you then also through the minds of the people, where he has been known to be the strongman and to take control or to put out of business independent news agencies. So you first deal with the hearts and then you deal with the minds. And in recent weeks, this has shut down a number of additional news agencies in Russia, ones that were not connected to the regime and were promoting things that the regime did not want to hear, at least from an outside perspective, and those have been shut down as well. So you have the hearts and the minds of the people that are more and more under the control of Putin and the current leaders. What you can see in Russia is that the knowledgeable people, those that are educated, will understand where Putin's coming from, but the vast majority of Russians are not living in the cities and are spread out through the vast area that is Russia, and they get their news from what's controlled, and either that through the church or through the media, which is controlled. So we look at what Putin been doing, but in many ways rebuilding Mother Russia. And there's clear signs in the major cities that the government and its people are rebuilding the past. What follows is just a few examples. One in the federal city of St. Petersburg. In 1914, the name was changed from St. Petersburg to Petrograd, and then in 1924 to Leningrad, and then 1991 back to St. Petersburg. And we'll also take a brief look at Moscow, which is another federal city, which was first referenced in 1147, and the capital of Russia, and it is most populous city with over 12 million people. So just a little here, just in case you're not familiar where Russia is. You can see it's over many different time zones. You can see Israel located in the Middle East. Just to the south of that in the light green is Saudi Arabia. To the north of that and in the yellowish color is Iran. And just to the west of Iran, just north of Israel, is Syria. And then you go north of there, you see in the green again, that is the Ukraine. And then, of course, the whole blue area is Russia. And then you have over in the dark green to the west, the U.S., and all the way to the northwest area is Alaska, which actually touches Russia to the Russian eastern component. So we'll take a look at a couple of locations within the Russian area. One is Moscow, and the other one is St. Petersburg. If we look at St. Petersburg in a little bit more detail, you have some areas here quite interesting. We'll show some pictures of Petergov, which is here, which is the summer palace to the Tsars, and then the famous palaces that were in St. Petersburg itself. There's a picture of a famous and very popular visitor attraction, this palace of Petergov. References the Russian Versailles, and it was quite damaged during World War II. The Germans made it to the outskirts of St. Petersburg, and they ran over this palace, but it's been restored quite significantly. It was actually a site in 2013 of a G20 summit. Just beautiful grounds and beautiful building. Throughout Russia, many churches of the Russian Orthodox Church that are pretty much in their grandeur. You would have thought that during the Soviet period that many of these things would have been destroyed. While there were certainly churches that were seized and destroyed, there were many that were left. They may have been covered up or not as much attended, but they are there in the open today and are widely understood to exist as churches and are attended and much more regularly than they were in the past. You see this one in St. Petersburg was built between 1883 and 1907, and it's a great example of a Russian Orthodox Church. In St. Petersburg, you may have heard of the Hermitage Museum. This is the Winter Palace of the Tsars. A beautiful place, again, very large scale and modernized. A lot of this was the residency of the Romanov emperors over a 200-year period, and today, as you can see and go into the Hermitage Museum. Another example of a church. This is outside of Petergov, just pretty much a couple of blocks away from the palace I showed a little bit earlier. They were built up, no doubt, for the Tsar and the family to be able to attend a church close by. So Russia has a history of a close association between the controlling party and the church. This is not a separate of church and state. That historically there has actually been a very close association between church and state. Certainly during the Soviet era, the church was put to the side, but there certainly was connections, but more put to the side in that it wasn't formally recognized, because really communism was more the church that was promoted, so to speak, than the Russian Orthodox Church. So a little bit, again, one of these federal cities. What you can see here is a set of ring roads. Traffic here is quite crazy. You may have seen reports on this, but there's a set of ring roads that's encircle one of the outer ring roads, one of the inner ones, another inner one, and all the way in the center actually is the Kremlin. The Kremlin is located here. You can see gardens and other palaces. There's the main palace here. There's actually a number of churches here. You have Red Square. You have St. Basil's church here. This is the area that most people would have seen and certainly see in current days, where they show pictures looking up to the Kremlin. Not too far away, down around kind of the corner, a couple blocks away, is the Bolshoi Ballet. The Bolshoi Ballet is a very famous ballet and opera house. You can see that in October 2011, the theater was reopened after extensive 6-year renovation. So again, many of the buildings of old have been renovated to be modern day examples of Russia. And then other pictures from up on the Kremlin itself. Again, during Soviet times, these things may have been made more plain, but in recent years, they have been brought back to life and represent the Russia of old. Many of these go back many, many years, and were left to be shown to people in today and brought back to life. This is out in Red Square, called the GUM. Many people would have seen this when you watch different military parades. Today it was historically a state department store under Soviet era, and today it's a high-end department store with very high-end shops. So again, we have these centers and circles, and this is showing Moscow today, the federal city, and we're zooming into it all the way down to the Kremlin, which is the right at the heart of the city. And then you have the areas as I mentioned earlier. And then finally, just looking out to Red Square, the GUM is on the right there. You see the Kremlin to the left. State Museum, St. Basil's is over to the right. And the last pictures here, I'll show you St. Basil's. This is actually not an active Russian Orthodox church. It was actually been a museum since the early 1900s. So with that, I will leave you in this session. Just start thinking about the movement of from the Soviet Union to the Russian Federation and the rebuilding of the Russian state in many ways back to the Tsars.